Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight to our Meet the Candidate event 2021 for our Dover City Schools Board of Education election. Tonight we have 3 or 4 of our candidates who will be answering questions written by the Dover Education Association as well as OAPSE Local 392. I'm going to begin by reading a statement from our 4th candidate, which is Mrs. Elizabeth Lauber. Thank you to the members of the DEA and OAPSE for organizing this forum tonight. I regret that I am unable to attend due to a commitment to help our daughter's family move from Dallas to northern New Jersey. As a candidate for re-election, I'm the proud mother of 4 Dover graduates, each of whom benefited from superb education that included academics, of course, but also sports, music, fine arts, and other extracurricular opportunities. I serve the district and our community out of a sense of gratitude and a desire to ensure that every Dover student continue to benefit from the Dover difference. As Director of Care Ministries for New Point Community Church with a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and a Master's of Business Administration in Human Resource Management, and the only woman serving on the board, I bring a unique perspective to our work. 8 years of BOE service have taught me to actively listen, learn with humility, and practice agility because things can change rapidly. Our school system is a living organism of hundreds of professionals, a couple thousand students, and about 1,000 families. Each of those people deserve our best efforts. If re-elected to continue serving our community, I pledge to do my best every day to preserve and grow the Dover difference. Thank you for your time. So that's from Mrs. Lauber, and I wanted to personally read that for you. In front of you or on the way in, hopefully you got a chance to grab our Meet the Candidate information and ground rules. If not, we have those in the back for you, and I'm going to go through them right now. Welcome to the Meet the Candidate event for the Dover City Schools Board of Education. My name is James Graves, and I'm the Vice President of the Dover Education Association, as well as the Legislative Committee Chairperson for this event tonight. We have several DEA members, Dover Education Association members here tonight representing. Up front, I have the DEA President, Mrs. Kathy Bond. We also have our Board Liaison, Daryl Schenkel, in the back, with Debbie Van Gilder, a representative for Dover Avenue. So if you need any help, you'll find us in our Dover or DEA shirts. Come ask. The DEA and OAPSE Local 392 have collaborated for you tonight to bring a forum where members of the community have the opportunity to learn about the candidates. Following the certification of candidates by the Board of Elections, the DEA and OAPSE Local 392 sent invitations and questionnaires to all 4 candidates. Each candidate was asked to complete a questionnaire, RSVP to the event. In the event a candidate was unable to participate, they were given the opportunity to complete the questionnaire and submit an opening statement that was read tonight. None of the candidates know or have seen any of the questions being asked tonight. Each candidate is permitted to have a copy of his or her completed questionnaire in front of them. We would like to remind all participants and attendees that this forum is designed to provide an opportunity to learn more information regarding the interests and positions of all candidates for the Dover City Schools Board of Education, so voters can make an informed decision when voting for a school board candidate. Neither the DEA nor OAPSE Local 392 will make any endorsements of candidates. Before I introduce our moderator, Mr. Jordan Miller, and our candidates up front, I'd like to go over a few ground rules. Please place all phones on vibrator silence. We ask that each candidate stand when giving his or her response to the questions and when presenting their closing statement. All candidates will be asked the same set of questions and will be given 90 seconds to respond. A candidate may ask for a question to be reread. The questions being asked tonight, as I mentioned earlier, were developed by the DEA and OAPSE Local 392 Joint Committee. A timekeeper, myself, located in the front row, will notify the candidates and moderator when 15 seconds are remaining and when their time has expired. The order of responses will rotate with each question, ensuring that each candidate receives an opportunity to answer the question first. The candidates may not participate in any crosstalk or interject with another candidate's response. This is not a debate. We ask the audience to remain silent during the duration of the forum and to hold applause until the end. If an audience member is being disruptive, they will be asked by our moderator to remain silent. If the disruption continues, then they'll be asked to leave the forum. At the conclusion of the questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to read a 2-minute closing statement. No candidate will be permitted to distribute any campaign literature tonight at this event. The Dover District policy does require masks for indoors. Masks are available at the check-in desk. Candidates and moderator will remove their masks as active participants of this forum. In addition to the pre-selected questions, we will be collecting questions submitted from you, the audience. Some of those questions will be incorporated into tonight's program. You may pick up a question submission paper at the registration table up front and submit your question to the representatives directing this event. You may choose to list your name or remain anonymous. Again, make sure to submit that by 7:15. On behalf of the DA and OAPSE, let me thank you for attending tonight. Right now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mr. Jordan Miller. And we have our participating candidates. We have Mr. Everett, we have Mr. Hanner, and we have Mr. Maston. So thank you once again for coming tonight. I'll turn it over to Mr. Miller.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you guys for having me tonight, and we're going to begin with Mr. Everett. First is a three-part question. I'm going to take my mask off as well. All right, there we go. First is a three-part question. Why did you choose to run for Dover Board of Education? What qualifications do you believe make you an ideal candidate for the school board? And in what ways are you currently involved in the Dover community?
Okay. Well, first off, I would like to join everyone else and thank the DEA and OAPSE Local 392 for this forum, hosting this forum, and allowing the three of us the opportunity to speak and be heard, not only in this room, but obviously in the community as well. Now, we'll get to business. Why have I become a candidate? I became a candidate primarily because I felt as though after a 27-year dry spell of being involved as much as I was in the Dover City Schools, I felt it was about time. And I thought it's time to get involved once again, try to be a part of, and try to offer what I can to make what I believe is a great school district even better. I was first elected in 1985 as a 24-year-old kid, and I will say the word kid, frankly by an overwhelming majority, and I took a seat January of '86. I was actually the youngest person to ever assume a seat on the Dover Board of Education, and I served 8 years and wrapped up my term December of 1993. I, at the time, was a police officer. I was very involved in activities, and I just wanted to further my activities with the children and get on the board. Why would I be a good board member? Primarily because of my background, my willingness to serve, and the things I've accomplished and what I have done previously as a board member. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Hanner. Do you need me to repeat? Okay. First question is, why did you choose to run for the Dover Board of Education? Second question, what qualifications do you believe make you an ideal candidate for the school board? And the third question is, in what ways are you currently involved in the Dover community?
In 90 seconds, I'll try to do that, but I might sound like an auctioneer, but we'll do our best. Evening, friends. Thank you very much for hosting the DEA. It's no surprise that this looks like a classroom. It's organized by the people that put this all together. I became a candidate for the Dover Board of Education because I've participated in the life of the district with levy campaigns and issues. I volunteered in some of your classrooms. My children, Jacob and Caroline, are at the middle school and high school. And I have a sense of, you ever have a Popeye the Sailor Man moment where you kind of have all you can stand and you can't stand it anymore? It wasn't a discontent or anger, but I saw a trust deficit continue to grow. The trust deficit between community members who sometimes feel as if they're only in touch with the school district when there's a levy issue or a ballot initiative. And candidly, we can do better. We talk about our students and our children being the Dover difference. We have higher expectations than just the minimum performance standards for our young people. I believe a Board of Education, especially in Dover, should hold themselves to higher expectations and continue a tradition of community involvement and engagement, because voters support what they help to create. And my goal is to create a more inclusive environment for decision-making and communication.
Thank you. Mr. Maston, Do you need me to repeat?
The 90 seconds is pretty quick, isn't it? I'll ask if I need help. Hi, I got on the Board of Education for one reason and one reason only. I'm a Dover boy. My kids are Dover kids. They all graduated from here. And the Dover schools did a wonderful job for me. I had a great experience. I was prepared to get out there and get a job. I was prepared to go to university and be quite successful. And I wanted to give that opportunity to other people. I wanted to share that because I thought, you know what, this is one of the best places I've ever been. I still am in touch with many of my classmates. We're going to be, two of them are coming back into town. We're going to play golf on Wednesday. A bad experience. I haven't picked up a club in a month. But the point being, the whole experience was just fantastic. I think that my career enabled me to get ready for this. I've been in a leadership role for the last 40 years in my Wendy's career. And now I'm owning restaurants, but running restaurants for other people. I ran a $30 million company and a $20 million company. It has lots of assets, has lots of people, and it's almost exactly like a school system. We have a $21 million business here, and it takes a lot of moxie and know-how to know what to do now and know what to anticipate is coming. Third question?
Third question, in what ways are you currently involved in the Dover community?
I'm on the Dover Affiliate Food Pantry. I'm the vice president there. Of course, I'm serving on the Board of Education right now. I think that's it right now. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Mr. Maston, we're actually going to start with you here so you get the first question for this one. What are your top objectives if elected to the school board?
Well, the single biggest issue we're dealing with right now is still facilities. And we just got the high school open and built, and it's been a tremendous asset. It's something we've needed. For the next 100 years, the kids are going to be able to go to a great building. But we have other buildings out there that are horrible. I was just talking to one of our teachers here before this. She has 90-degree days in her classroom. That's just completely unacceptable. So we need to figure out, at minimum, how to get circulated heat and circulated air in these buildings. The districts in this county have done that. Have seen a dramatic drop in absenteeism and tardiness, and it's just get that germs out of there, and everybody wants to be there instead of I just can't stand being there anymore. I went back to her grandparents' day at Dover Avenue, which is where I went to school. I couldn't believe how tight it was in there. And so we need to continue to work on facilities, whether we figure out what we're going to do with Dover Avenue and what we're going to do with middle school and the two elementaries. Somehow, some way, we've got to at least get tempered air in there, and of course, maybe we need to do something with Dover Avenue and combine it with others or build a new elementary. That's all yet to be determined, but it needs to be addressed because it's a dramatic need.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner, what are your top objectives if elected to the school board?
Thank you very much. So top objectives are three. The first one is to do our level best to improve the relationship between our voters and our parents and our school district. You don't have to dig very far, whether you're on social media or 10 or 15 minutes on the street corner, to learn that there are people that don't feel like they're being heard. And once again, I said it in the first conversation, people support what they help to create. And even if they don't necessarily agree, being heard is a very important factor. So number one, we increase transparency. Number two, I would like the district to begin playing long ball again. We've been through a COVID pandemic, and so candidly, that's put a lot of the long ball stuff on hold. But if we look at the 2018-2019 school year, the calendar for that year lists objectives. In 2018, one of the objectives of the Board of Education that year was to do some long-term facilities planning. It's 2021. And we have to begin thinking about those very issues you mentioned, as well as the validation that our students learn best in classrooms in front of teachers. And the third one is simply just evaluation. There are tools today that can help us increase and enhance our ability to figure out what we're doing right, what we need to do better, and where we take those specific gifts that we have or challenges to overcome and make it a better day.
Thank you. Mr. Everett.
I think one of the main objectives or goals I might have would be allow myself to be what I was those 8 years that I served, and that is to be accessible. I think it's very important that board members are accessible to the public, whether you're in the grocery store, the restaurant, or wherever you may be. My life has been public service. So most of you know me, you know that it's always been, you've always had the ability to walk up to me at any given time and say what you have to say, ask what you need to ask, and I'll do my best to give you an answer. If I don't know, we'll find out and I'll get back with you. I think we need to open up that channel of communication once again and allow that accessibility. So that when we do have a problem, we try to solve the problem when it's a small problem. We don't let that fester into a huge ordeal. And then we have 5 members of the board trying to make a decision on what we could have taken care of had I relayed a problem to either a building principal or superintendent or whomever it should have been. I think also the facilities, we need to take a look. They're all getting a little bit older. We did do a remodeling back in the 1990s. We passed a $5.5 million bond issue to remodel the elementaries, and the middle school addition was made. I think at some point we're going to have to go back and at least look at where we're at with those elementaries. And number 3, I think we have to be sure that we provide the students with the safest buildings, safest environment we can possibly do. As I said before, I've been in the keeping children safe business for 4 decades. I think I know what I'm talking about when it comes to safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner, we'll start with you for this one. As a board member, how do you plan to build relationships, trust, transparency, and accountability with all stakeholders in the decision-making process in Dover City Schools?
I love the question, Jordan. Thank you. The good news is we're not the first people to ask for this sort of transparency. If we spend some time online, we might see Hudson City Schools actually videocasts their board meetings on their local cable access channel. I'm not saying that's an opportunity for Jordan Miller News, but one thing we could very simply do, and that is post a link to YouTube and stream those meetings live. District policy has some kind of archaic writing in it. One of the pieces says, if you would like to be informed of special meetings of the Board of Education, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to the board office and we'll send you notification when a special meeting occurs. That's still in the books. It's 2021. If folks would like to know when a special meeting occurs, very easily join a listserv or very easily join a text group and once again increase the ability for transparency. Beyond that, board meeting minutes. If you have a notepad in front of you or a cell phone, check out the Coshocton City School District. They do a great job of posting very thorough agendas, complete with links to financial data that board members are apprised of ahead of time. That's how we go about building better transparency and trust within the district, not by reinventing the wheel, but by adopting best practices from elsewhere.
Thank you. Mr. Everett. Thank you.
Well, I concur, truthfully, with the transparency, and I see no problem with posting a link and having the board meetings communicated and shot out through the internet these days. It is a way for the people who cannot be there and who may choose not to be there to be able to watch and know what's going on in their district. And when it comes down to it, let's face it, they're paying the bills for the district. They have a right to know what's going on. Another one is what I just mentioned a little bit ago, and that is accessibility. I think we have to be accessible. We have to be able to speak to folks from every single level of Ohio, Dover, not just certain groups, not just groups that we may communicate with frequently at different establishments or places. We have to be able to speak to everybody. And again, I prided myself as a police officer for the city of Dover to be able to walk in just about any home and be able to communicate with those folks. And even restaurants, taverns, anywhere I was, people would come up to me. And I never once, that I'm aware of, shied them away and said, hey, I'm on my time, don't bother me. There's no such thing when you're a public servant as your time. You're always under the microscope, and you have to realize that. I think that there are many things that we could do, as Brian indicated, and I think we need to take a look at different districts and see what their practices are. I don't mean to piggyback on what he said, but I think there are a lot of things that we could be doing to help with transparency in the district.
Thank you. Mr. Maston. Do you need me to repeat the question? As a board member, how do you plan to build relationships, trust, transparency, and accountability with all stakeholders in the decision-making process in Dover City Schools?
Well, once we understand that this is something that needs to be worked on, it's an easy solution. We have to make a concerted effort to building relationships with every single group out there. We already have the community groups like the Kiwanis and some of those folks. We have the teachers, or the parent-teachers groups. There's so many ways we can communicate with them in person and then get out and do a speakers bureau kind of thing. That's, first, face-to-face is the number one way you talk to people, because if we post it online, which we need to do, exactly what Brian was talking about, it's exactly the right thing to do, but it's not quite adequate enough. We need to get to the point where we can be in front of folks and folks can talk to us. And so we got to start figuring out how to get out there and circulate and talk. We have many capable administrators who can do this. We have the 5 board members. There's no reason in the world we can't tackle this and make sure that we're going to do what is necessary so that people feel they can talk to us. We make ourselves available. Of course, everybody's allowed to come to the board meeting. That's neither here nor there. We need to make a concerted effort to get out there and be more aggressive.
Thank you. Mr. Everett, we're going to start with you here. And this is a long-winded question, all right? In the candidate screening questionnaire, you were asked to rank priorities in a period of tight school funding and increased enrollment. The areas indicated were supplies and materials, raises for teachers and staff, locally competitive pay for substitutes, maintenance and building improvements, remedial services, gifted programs, extracurricular activities, and staff training development. Can you please share with us your priorities and explain your rankings?
I'll do my best. I did rank those items, and I tried to put a caveat actually underneath the rankings, and I did say that obviously my rankings will be different than anyone else. My rankings are not going to be necessarily the same. I think it depends on the ranker of the categories, and we're dealing with financial constraints. Is that what you said? Financial constraints?
Yes.
Okay. But when we deal with financial constraints, I think we have to take a look at our rankings. Is your desire to go through these one by one? Is that?
Do you guys want to go through them one by
Is that what
one?
the gist is? Or-
What do you think is most important?
Well, I think one thing we need to do is have training and development for staff. We have to keep our staff well-educated themselves. They have to be on top of everything. Staff, we cannot operate out of the 1990s. We can't operate out of the early 2000s. We have to have our staff have continuing ed and have whatever development and training that they need to keep them up to date. I would say that's my number one out of these. Number two, I have maintenance and building improvements. We cannot let our buildings go down. We cannot let them have students in and out of buildings if they have leaking roofs, if they have problems with the heating and cooling, obviously no cooling, but with the heating and the circulation. We have to maintain our buildings. They are the pride of Dover, and we need to continue. Supplies and materials, we've got to have supplies and materials for our children to learn. So on and so forth. I knew we'd run out of time. At the very bottom of mine, I've got like substitute teachers. Not that they're not important, but when we're trying to rank and list, those to me will fall down at the bottom only because we've got so many other things that need our attention.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner.
Here we go. 90 seconds. Long question, same question.
Same question.
So we do this without the benefit of a build a budget exercise. I learned at the knee of Brenda Hurst, who was a treasurer, 4 treasurers ago. She did a build a budget exercise that sort of helped build a very foundational understanding, not just for members of the Dover administration and staff, but also for community members. At the very top, candidly, and I'm not playing the home crowd, it's raises for faculty and staff. We have to provide an environment and a rate of pay that attracts, retains, empowers, and develops quality people. At 3 years at 0%, and I understand you've picked up some step-ups along the way, and there have been some additional opportunities with some supplemental contracts. Incoming teachers, when looking at the pay scale in Dover, when comparing it to the pay scale at Conotton Valley, North Canton, Jackson, 3-4 years ago, we were getting a thanks but no thanks, and today we're getting some no's. And that was from my time on the Financial Advisory Committee 4 or 5 years ago. After that, substitute pay is absolutely a priority. You guys, when you can't be there, need to have somebody else there. Dover, doesn't necessarily rank toward the top in substitute pay.
Thank you. Mr. Maston.
Surprisingly enough, I'm gonna have a different answer from Bob. He projected that, but we've developed a culture in Dover, especially on the board, that every single person that we deal with is important. And everything we do is important. I rank them all the same. Teachers do need pay raises. We have inflation out there and they need to keep up with that. At the same time, they need training. At the same time, they need supplies. At the same time, we need substitute teachers. Tell me which one of those is the most important when we have COVID and a couple of our teachers are out. All of this stuff's important. There's not one single thing that we do in the schools that is not important. We need to make sure that we can address them all with an equal amount of vigor, resources, and an attitude that this is going to happen if we can make it happen. Sometimes we can't make it happen. When the state comes in and steals our tax dollars, the dollars you pay to the local school, and they send them to other districts, there's not a thing we can do about that, except go out and try to raise another levy for pay raises. Not a very popular issue. Very difficult spot they put us in. Now we're starting to get some of our funding back. We're looking for some pretty good years coming up here. However, everything we do is important, and every single person we have in this district is important. And that's the bus drivers and the custodians and the teachers, and I mean, just everybody. I'm not gonna do the list because I'm gonna leave somebody out. So I put a 1 by each one of those because I don't list anything more important than the next, because if you don't do this, something else doesn't get done. And we don't wanna do that. We wanna make sure everything gets done. And we're gonna do our level best as long as I'm on board to make sure that we're accomplishing that.
Thank you. Mr. Maston, I'm actually going to toss this question to you again. All right.
Okay.
In the 2019-20, 2020-21, and 21-22 school years, teachers in Dover City schools have received a 0% base salary increase, given an 8.67% inflation rate in the United States during that same time period, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Do you feel that Dover City Schools is remaining competitive in attracting and retaining high-quality educators?
Well, I absolutely do. I already explained the whole issue about pay. You know, when we don't have any ability to raise money except for taxes. When they take the tax dollars you sent to us and they send them somewhere else, there's not much we can do about that. But I'll tell you one thing. I have a buddy right now who travels amongst all the county schools. And he's telling me without question, he hears it over and over and over again. You know what? I wish I was working in Dover. When the consultants come in and the salesmen come in and they deal with us and they talk to our leaders and our teachers, they all say the same thing. Boy, it's really different here. This is really interesting. You guys do it, and it's a very big compliment. We are doing a great job and people still want to be here. They know that this stuff happens from time to time, but it's not permanent. Recently, we seem to be getting all of our money back again, and so we've been able to pay all of our bills. Hopefully that means there's going to be a pay raise in the future. I'm not trying to speak out of school because I can't predict what the board's going to do. But I'm certainly going to be in favor of that because we do need to do that, and you all deserve it. You all do a great job, and the reason we have such a great school system is because of our teachers. Thank you.
Mr. Hanner.
I think I kind of answered it before, but it is a priority. I absolutely am in favor of making sure that we're doing our very best to support the families that support those in our family that have children going to the Dover City School District. It's really important that you guys know that beyond just simply pay, you've got an awful lot of people rooting for you. It's been a rough couple of years. Someone reminded me the other day that, we had 2 weeks to flatten the curve 3 school seasons ago. So, you went that final 9 weeks. Last year was probably one of the more harrowing years in your professional lives. And this year has been off to a start that isn't really what anybody planned for or expected. So you have to know that yes, those salaries are important. One thing I want to point your attention to, regardless of who gets elected to the Board of Education, my expectation is that anybody sitting up here, and even Mrs. Lauber, is going to do their best to better equip our teachers and staff with better pay. I want you to pay attention at the General Assembly. Those people uncapped us for the first time in decades, but they did it for this many years. The insanity is that they turn around and ask our school district treasurers for 2 5-year forecasts a year. They funded us fully, they've guaranteed it for 2 years, and we're living off of 5-year forecasts twice a year. It's nuts.
Thank you. Mr. Everett?
Well, my fear is that if we continue with zeros, we're gonna lose some great staff. We're gonna deplete staff. We're gonna have the inability to recruit and retain staff. We've gotta do something. Obviously, when you're in a financial crunch, when you're in financial restraint, there's not much you can do, and I do agree with that. You have to ask teachers and classified OPSI members, hey, help us, will you? Help us, which I think they've gracefully done over and over and over again. I know that in the 1980s, and I'm sorry to always refer to the 1980s, but I was there. I remember it as distinctly as I can remember yesterday. We were in financial restraints, and we had to do the same thing. In fact, we had to riff, and it was not a pleasant experience. I hope we never have to do that again. It was a terrible experience, in fact. But we've got to be able, if we can financially afford it, and again, there's a fine line between the state of Ohio, as Brian indicated, the state of Ohio and the legislature offering funds and having to rely on our taxpayers every time. Let's face it, everybody's fed up with taxes, all of us, us included. And it's just the most unfair way to fund schools I've ever seen in my entire life is through levies. It's terrible, but we have no alternative. So if the state of Ohio doesn't give us what we need, we've got to come to the taxpayers. But yes, I think 000 is not going to keep great people here, and some are going to want to leave.
Mr. Hanner? What do you believe is the number one issue Dover City Schools is facing today, and how would you work to address this issue?
I don't want to beat a dead horse here. We've talked about the transparency issue. The reason why I think the transparency issue is important is because down the road, we are going to need to return to our voters, our taxpayers, our parents, and our grandparents, and we're going to need to ask them for some additional operating funds. I'm not talking about in the next even year or term or even decade, but the time will come when we'll need to do that. And if we treat the voters like a rich uncle who only gets a phone call from us on the day that we need 50 bucks, they're gonna tell us no. So one of the things that I'm very loyal to is that a Board of Education meeting probably isn't the best time to have a dialogue, right? It's somewhat one-way communication. Mr. Maston's here, Mr. Studer's here, Mr. Everett's here. They've all had experience on the Board of Education, and they'll tell you that you might have a couple of minutes to address a school board. And the school board can't necessarily engage in a two-way communication. One of the best practices that other districts employ when they're doing some long-term planning is having some core community meetings where some members of the Board of Education, the administration, perhaps some committee members from the faculty and staff, sit down with community members and we hash out the issues that are most important. That level of communication is the only thing that will help sustain levy passage in the future.
Mr. Maston? I'm all over the place with these questions, aren't I? Confusing you all. All right, Mr.
Well, that's
Maston.
okay. It's a big job.
Do you need me to re-ask?
No, I don't. We had this question before. My answer hasn't changed. Our facilities are in bad shape. Dover Avenue is 100 years old. We have several elementaries that are 60 and 70 years old, haven't been touched since then. We don't have circulated air or circulated heat in any of these buildings except the high school. It's ridiculous. So we need to fix that, and that needs to be our number one priority because our teachers work there. That's one of the things that the public doesn't always consider when they think about things. It's about the kids. It is about the kids. But by golly, our people work there. And we have an obligation to provide them with a sufficient work environment that makes it easy for them to come to work every day and be motivated to take care of business. And so we have a very, in my eyes, a sacred responsibility to take care of that and make sure that this is something that's a number one priority. We have a lot of things we need to do. When you run an organization this size, something's always broken. Something always needs to be fixed. So there's something that you need. Don't let things build up because what's going to happen is you're going to have 5 things to do instead of 1. You got to keep taking care of things. You got to keep taking care of things. But this is permanent. These facilities are going to be the way they are until we fix them. And so 90 degrees in a classroom. My granddaughter was out at the middle school 2 years ago puking. And a bunch of her classmates were puking. It was so darn hot. They weren't used to that kind of thing. When we went to school, when the covered wagons were out there, that's all we had. Nobody had air conditioning. If you don't have air conditioning today, it feels awful. You have kids throwing up, well, what kind of learning environment is that? It's gotta be facilities.
Thank you. Mr. Everett?
I think, maybe I better repeat that.
All right.
I can tell you what I think.
What do you believe is the number one issue Dover City Schools is facing today, and how would you work to address this issue?
Well, I think we go back to funding again. I think we do. And the fact that, as I said earlier, not only just a few minutes ago, that the state of Ohio makes it so tough on school districts, and they have to always rely on the voters. Again, yes, let's hope we don't have to have a levy very soon. Let's hope that the state legislature finally sees it, and not only during this biennium, but they continue to fund the schools properly, at least give us enough money to run the schools properly, or hopefully they will. I think that's a big problem. I think, again, also, I think we also have to use our money wisely, and we have to be able to chart out and have the forecast with, working with our treasurer, working with our superintendent, as far as the needs. We've got to be able to forecast, what do we need now? What do we need here in the next few years? What are we going to do? What can we do? We have to do all of those things, I believe. I think also, we need to be accessible. We're back to that accessibility. I don't know when it changed, but when I was there in the 1990s, 80s and 90s, we had board meetings in elementary schools. We had board meetings at the middle school. I know we have a wonderful brand new boardroom, but we were at least out in the public, and we were at different buildings, and those folks from those buildings close by could come into the board meetings, and they were there. And I'm not sure when that changed, but if I can get there, I would love to bring back meetings at buildings instead of just a boardroom.
Thank you, and you can stay right at the mic for this. Here we go. How would you ensure that your personal opinions and politics do not influence district-wide policy, especially when confronted with public opposition?
Well, I think that's, can be answered somewhat easily for me. There's 5 of us. No one person can make a decision. There's 5 of us collectively, we have to vote. We would have to be 5 folks that have opinions, 5 folks that decide an issue. I think we're on the right track at least. I don't think one of us could just make that decision. And I don't really believe that personally we should allow our personal prejudice or our personal wishes or desires. We are placed in those seats by the voters. And I think there are many times that we need to listen to what our voters are telling us. I know there were several times that, and I'm sorry to use the word I do apologize for but there were several times in the past I did cast the only no vote on certain issues because I had so many voters make contact with me and say, look, this is important to us. We want you to vote no on behalf of us. And it was not as if I was privy to certain information. They weren't. This was a very well-known issue. And you're welcome to look it up. It was 4-1, a couple different votes. And I cast a no vote because, again, my accessibility to the public gave me the ability to listen to them and do as they asked me to do. So as far as my personal, I don't see it happening with me. I really would like to rely on our voters a little bit more.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner?
How do we keep personal politics out of board decisions?
How will you ensure that your personal opinions and politics do not influence district-wide policy, especially when confronted with public opposition?
Perfect. Well, so the good news is the Board of Education, not just here, but just about any Board of Education in Ohio, hires typically 2 people, right? The superintendent and the treasurer. And from there, most of their work comes from recommendations, dissemination of information. If the superintendent is recommending a slate of hires or adopting a curriculum, or the treasurer is recommending payables on a vendor list, there's some supporting information behind it. And so one of the benefits that most school boards have is they're receiving an agenda ahead of the meeting, as well as some informational packets. And it's with that informational packet that there might be an exchange between a board member and the superintendent or treasurer, but not all 5 board members, right? Because we want to, stay compliant with it. Asking questions, making sure that those pieces are fully answered. One of the great things about America is that we can all have our own politics. If we air them too often, we embarrass ourselves. And so one of the things that we have to do is put one thing first. What is in the best interests of our students? What is in the best interests of the young people in our district? And that will be what I would use to guide my decision based upon a recommendation from the superintendent or treasurer.
Thank you. And Mr. Maston? Yes.
I take a different approach on that answer. That's a shock to most of you. What we bring to the board is our individuality, and I don't think we should check that at the door. We have political ideas, we have religious ideas, we've got ideas on what we should do next, what's important, et cetera, and we need to bring that. That needs to stop when you can see, obviously, the rest of the board is heading in a direction that they believe is what's best for our students and our teachers and the education they receive and the opportunities they have. No individual is more important than the group, and so as long as we keep in mind that I'm going to express my ideas, but I believe I'm going to vote with the majority. I'm going to support what they're doing because the majority rules here. I don't need to do a protest vote. That means nothing to me. What means to me is we need to be unified so everybody can say that we stood behind things and we did what we thought was right for the benefit of our kids, our teachers, the OPSI folks, parent groups, every single people that are involved with the Dover City Schools. Even a guy like Mike Studer. We want to know what he has to say. He always kids me in board meetings, so I'm just getting back up. No, but the point being, everybody's important. Everything is important, and so we're going to listen to everybody. But we need your individuality, and that's extremely important. Just don't let it get carried away. And of course, the other four board members have an obligation to screen that and make sure that we're not letting someone get out of hand. Don't get too far off the reservation. I think we've done a pretty good job in my time on the board of policing each other, and that's one of the things that's really hard to do. You need to tone that down. Nobody wants to say that, but at times it does need to be said, and we've done that.
Mr. Maston, remain up there, please. Thank you. School board meetings across the country have become increasingly hostile during the pandemic, with much of the debate focused on parents' rights versus the school district rights to maintain a level of safety for all students. What is your interpretation of the legal authority of local school boards in regards to creating an equitable and safe learning environment for all stakeholders?
Well, we have an obligation to make sure that we get one thing and one thing only accomplished. We need to keep kids in classrooms. And as long as we can do that safely, we're going to do that. We just made a decision 2 weeks ago that we were going to let the parents decide if their kids wear a mask or not. Then came the surge. That day's over. If you're exposed, you don't wear a mask, you got to sit out for 10 days. That's not keeping kids in the classroom, so we need to have masks. And so in this country, we don't really know who has the authority in these regards, because is it the health department? Is it the governor? We discovered we got a little fly in the ointment because it's very confusing as to who's actually in charge and who actually has the authority to do things. But I know one thing, we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that we do what we can to keep kids in classrooms. It's hard to believe that kids are getting a great education when they're sitting at home all day long on a computer. Whole school districts do that. They had Quaker Digital Academy. We had a chance to do that, but we decided we weren't going to do that because we didn't believe that was best for kids. And I'm not knocking what they're doing. This is not Philly bashing at all. It's just we believe we need to get the kids in classrooms in front of the teachers. They have the best chance to get the best education and do the learning. Whatever we have to do to get that done, we're going to try to get it done. We wanted the parents to make that decision, and it got pulled right away from us when we had the surge. When the surge goes away, we'll have to see what that decision looks like at that point.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner?
I feel bad for members of the Board of Education because we have seen the governor abdicate his responsibilities. He didn't necessarily abdicate it. The General Assembly took it away from him, but he could still issue a mask mandate and then push the legislature and the Senate to override it. And that's a shame. I mean, we're poor for it that the people who we've elected to represent us in Columbus are pushing these decisions down with different interpretations between, the local health commissioner, a city health commissioner, another health commissioner. There's really no uniformity there. And so it has fallen to people who didn't sign up to do this. I don't imagine you ran for the very first time, or you, Mr. Everett, ran for the very first time to decide whether or not kids should wear masks in school during a pandemic. I certainly didn't. What's a pandemic? To that point, We do, once and for all, have an answer to that kind of crazy question that someone asked years ago when we were trying to build a new high school. We're all going to be online from home anyhow in 10 years, right? I mean, we heard that person. We now have proof in the pudding. We have data in the form of test results. We have experiential data. We have parents who used to think they could do a better job teaching their kids about certain subjects than the teachers. And all of that is laid bare. Kids belong in the classrooms. We need to do what we can to keep them there.
Thank you. Mr. Everett?
Well, I concur, face-to-face learning can't be beat. It's why we have teachers, it's what we need, and it's very unfortunate that boards of education have had to make decisions like this. But the problem is, if the masks are not worn in school and there is somebody with COVID, then obviously the children surrounding them in certain amount of feet are asked and have to stay out of school at least 10 days. And when you have two parents, it takes two parents to make a house go around. Which one is going to pick that they're going to be off for 10 days, that's going to miss work? And if they don't have the sick leave, if they don't have the ability to have sick leave, then somebody's out financially. So it is a burden. It's a burden all the way around. Listen, I've had one of these on since August 18th at Plain Local Schools. That's where I'm at every day. I'm in 3 K4 buildings. Do I like it? Absolutely not. I despise it. But I know that we have to do it, mainly because our superintendent said we do. But besides that, I know that we have to do it because as a deputy sheriff and an SRO, I have to set an example for our young children. And I have to wear mine when I'm with them and out in the hallways and in their vision. I have to do it. And also, we need to keep them in the classroom, keep them safe, and keep them learning because, as I said, face-to-face learning cannot be beat. And it was proven about a year ago. It was almost a fail.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. And this question's for you here. If successfully elected, will you promise to serve the full 4-year term for this Board of Education position? If not, why?
That's a great question, and I'm amazed it's directed at me. No wonder, I guess, huh? I have full plans, if elected, to serve 4 years. I have no crystal ball. I cannot tell you what will happen in my life. I have absolutely zero knowledge as to what might happen a year from now, 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. I have full intent of serving 4 years. Again, without a crystal ball, I have no way of knowing what might take place in my life that would distract or cause me to walk away. I didn't walk away in the 1980s and 90s. I stayed and finished my 8-year term. And I have no desire right this moment to walk away. And I can just look at anybody and tell you I have no desire to walk away. I plan on being there. But again, the crystal ball I don't have, so I don't know what will happen that could cause me to not be there. But I have full intentions of being there.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner?
Same question?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Maston?
Now you can compare and contrast board members. Well, I have every intention of staying on the board. I've been here 28 years. It's been a privilege and honor to do this. And if I get elected, this is going to be my last term. Yesterday I just turned 70. Most people think I don't look a day over 68, but that's how that is. But the point being, this is really important stuff to me. My kids are here. My grandkids are here. I was here. My brothers and sisters are here. We're all Dover boys. We're all Dover girls. This is important stuff. So we're going to stay after this and make sure we're going to complete the job that's done. And if I get elected, you can count on me.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner, we're going to start with submitted audience member questions here. Mr. Hanner. How do you plan to advocate for the arts in Dover City Schools? How do you plan to help the arts grow?
Thank you for the question. My volunteer work at Dover Avenue Elementary School was actually with Mrs. Moan, the art teacher at Dover Avenue. And that was a year that we had kind of a bumper crop of students at Dover Avenue, and she lost her classroom. Mr. Graves, I think that was your classroom too. Ultimately, we had art on a cart. And so she would seek some parents that were willing to help, push the cart up and down the way. There are far too many districts in Ohio that when they have to begin making a decision about cuts, it happens in either the performing arts or the music arts or the visual arts. Dover's difference, one of the things we can be extremely proud of is that we have a very vibrant program, not just in the art department at an elementary or high school level with Mrs. Hanegraatt and the other folks that teach there. We continue to do everything we could to work together with the Ohio Arts Council, seeking additional grant funding. I'm really proud of the work that our superintendent has done. Mrs. McCrate and other leaders in our district are out there seeking operating funds. We have a rather large literacy grant right now that our staff are trying to gear up for. That same effort and attention can and should be applied to those art classes that would help promote it. And I hope I answered that properly.
Thank you. Mr. Everett?
Well, I agree. I think arts are very important for the children that may not be in sports, the children that may not wish to be in sports. I think the arts are their outlet. Plus there are some that are in sports that the arts are their outlet. But I think we need to make sure that we keep the arts on the tip top of our learning curve, so to speak. I see no reason why we should ever downsize our arts. And I know that sometimes when we have like COVID, I know that up where I'm at, we also had the art on the cart. And it was just a tragedy for our art teachers to push that cart around and their room became unavailable. And it was really and truly very, very difficult for her. But I think we just need to apply for the grants, apply for the funding. I think we need to promote the arts as well. I think we do a good job of that, but I think we could also maybe get out in these buildings, as I said. Let's get out in the buildings and let's have art displays within the building so that when the board comes to meet at your building, we're able to show off to the general public what we've done, what you've done, and what we're able to accomplish when we put our mind to it. I think the arts is one place where we can excel, and we have excelled in Dover over the years, and there's absolutely no reason why we can't continue. There's funding available if our funding goes down, and there are grants available throughout the entire state, the community, and the country.
Thank you. Mr. Maston?
When I first went to my then fiance's house, I saw a picture she had painted of her mom. I thought, who did that? She said she did it. Are you an artist? No, oh my gosh. I can't paint. I can't do anything, but here's what I can do. I refer back to what I said earlier. Everything we do is important. And that art student just as important as that person who's playing football, the person who's in the AP class. There's no difference. Everything we do and everybody we have is important. We have an orchestra, for crying out loud. How many small schools have orchestras? We need as many opportunities as we can to get kids in activities so that they know and how to accept responsibility, how to suffer disappointment, and how to achieve. We had a rule in our house. You don't get to come home after school. You be in an activity or we're going to pick one for you. But you need to get out there and do all this stuff because that's where the education really spreads. So if we have an issue with the art class, then we need to figure out what we're going to do to make sure that this is something that's on the front of everybody's agenda. Nothing is unimportant. And we want to make sure that, we have the symphonic band, we have the marching band, we have the competition, Ars Nova. We are doing a ton of things. So we know all those activities for kids. And if we're having an issue with the art department and it's not being funded properly or it's it's not made important enough, then we need to figure that out and make it important because everything we do and everybody we have is important.
Mr. Maston, thank you. How does having and not having children currently enrolled in Dover City Schools inform your potential role as a board member?
Say that again.
How does having or not having children currently enrolled in Dover City Schools inform your potential role as a board member?
Well, the big difference is when I had kids in school, I always knew what was going on day to day in the classrooms and things, so you felt like you had a better idea, but we only had two children, so it's only in two levels. My idea is I'm down at the administration building every week. I'm talking to the superintendent, I'm talking to the treasurer, I want to know what's going on. So I've stayed informed because this is really important to me. I love the Dover City Schools. It's like a love affair for me. And as I said, I had a great experience here. Everybody here that is important, I want to make sure that I've done for them whatever a lot of other people have done for me. A day won't go by that I don't do a Schraderism. Cliff Schrader, a lot of people didn't like Cliff Schrader, but I'll tell you what, I can tell you 10 things that he taught me that I never forgot, including pi, 3.14159. He did the little ditty, secant, cosine, tangent, sine, 3.14159. Oh my gosh, that's important because now we're digging into science, we're digging into chemistry, we're digging into physics. And Cliff was a guy that taught us that. And so all this stuff we use every single day, and we want to make sure that everybody has that available too.
Thank you. Mr. Everett? Yes.
Sorry.
How does having or not having children currently enrolled in Dover City Schools inform your potential role as a board member?
Well, obviously, I would have no children in the school district. When I did serve previously, I did. However, she really was in elementary school when I left, so it wasn't like I had a couple high school children. I don't see as though it's going to be a hindrance at all. I'd like to keep apprised. I like to keep up to date. I would certainly, if I found out something, if I heard something, I would certainly phone the superintendent to find out if it was fact or fiction. I have no problem. Again, I think it goes back to accessibility. I have several different friends that have the children. I know I'm told, maybe not on a daily basis, but I am told over and over again sometimes what's happening at certain buildings and what's going on. And I don't see as though it's a big hindrance whatsoever, the fact that I don't have a child in the school district. In fact, I don't have a problem with that at all. I would hope that no voter would have a problem with that. I would maintain my level of excitement because of being elected and being a board member. I've demonstrated over the years that I care about children. I would be at functions, I would be just as I was previously. You would probably get tired of seeing me because I would be at so many different functions. Having children in the building or not, to me, that will not hinder anything I decide to do.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner?
Same question. I do have 2 children. They are school age. I know which one of you can sing. I know which one of you tell the best jokes. I know. I would tell you this, my kids come home excited having been a part of something special just about every day at school. I don't know that it has a significant impact though on whether or not as a member of the Board of Education it impacts the thoughts, because I think anybody that runs for the Board of Education, Mrs. Lauber, Mr. Everett, Mr. Master, or myself, has a little sense of altruism in them. Like, it's not just my kids, right? It's our kids. Ohio was one of the first states, almost 200 and some years ago, to make education compulsory in 1820. And they did that not because people needed to get their kids off the farm. They did it because they realized that an educated community would raise all boats. And so for a while, until you were 16 years old, you had to be in school, and you could get an exemption when you're 16 to go work on the farm. But regardless of your role as a parent or as a grandparent or as a proud alum of the district, guys, we're here for all of the kids. It is fun though. It is fun as a parent. Each of these board members began their first term as parents, and I look forward to it too.
Thank you. Mr. Everett. Final question submitted by the audience tonight, and then after this, we'll move into the conclusion, correct? The closing statements, okay. All right. Please talk about the next 3 to 5 years for Dover City Schools. Where do you see growth and where do you see cost savings?
Well, as a person that is not seated at the board table, it's very difficult for me to try to tell you something that I honestly don't have the answers to. I'm not privy to some of those that information yet. I have no way of knowing some of those answers. I know that what I would hope is I could find out that what is important is obviously funding, that we need to make sure that we can maintain our funding and that we can offer the very best to our children and to our staff as far as the funding end of it goes. We've got to be able to offer what we can to the best for our children. It's very, very difficult as an outsider, so to speak, to be able to speak in detail as to what that question the answer that they may desire, because I'm not there. I don't know. I don't know what our forecast is, but I know that we've got to do everything we can to save money, to cut costs. We cannot be frivolous with taxpayers' dollars. I think the Dover Schools does a good job now of that, and I would just try to see to it that we continue that practice. I think that we need to maintain our buildings. Again, we're back to that priority. We've got to maintain those buildings that we have and keep them going as long as we can keep them going. But I apologize for not knowing details, but I just can't possibly know them without being there.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner?
Can you repeat the question so I get all the nuance out of it there?
Please talk about the next 3 to 5 years for Dover City Schools. Where do you see growth and where do you see cost savings?
Okay, 3 to 5 years, that's 1 year beyond what the General Assembly has promised us in uncapped fees. So let's hope we don't have to be on the ballot. That's the goal for the next 2 years. We have the ability to operate uncapped, properly funded by the state of Ohio, and that gives us a reprieve from having to do that. During that time, I want to make sure we're building trust. I want to make sure we're having community conversations, not shouting matches at Board of Education meetings. I want people engaged, but I think we got to find the right alley and lane for that. I want to make sure that people feel like they're supporting something that's picking up momentum and doing things. So we haven't talked at all about the migrant community within Dover. I graduated in 1995 and went away to Kent State University and came home in 1999 and realized that some of the demographics in our community have changed. And I'm sorry, I sound like a nerd when I throw out dates and stuff, but one of the mandates is that we educate all children, not just some children or our children or the tall kids, but all children, even the ones that don't speak a native tongue. And I think it's really important that we do our part as a community to make sure that they're a presence in our priorities as well, because they're here to stay. And we should do our part to making sure that they're getting the best education they can.
Thank you. Mr. Masson,
Did you say you were being a nerd? Why don't you repeat that, please?
Do you need me to repeat it? Please talk about the next 3 to 5 years for Dover City Schools. Where do you see growth and where do you see cost savings?
Well, first of all, there's no place for cost savings. The next cost savings will be reduction in staff. We've been cutting and cutting and cutting because the state's been stealing our money. So that question has already been answered. What our hope is, once we get fully funded again, we can start restoring some of the things we had. First things being, we need to start paying our people. Even if we don't get a chance to get funded fully, we need to get on the ballot and make sure we have operating money so that our folks can get their pay raises. That's a big priority. The growth is going to come from our effort in facilities. We start turning these places into places where people look forward to being every single day. It's an environment that's like everybody else's environment. Nobody works in an office that's not air conditioned day except our teachers. What a bunch of crap. We need to fix that. And so when we're not going to have numerical growth, we're going to have growth in attitude, want to, can't wait. That's a very important thing because attitude is the most important thing you have in any organization this size. We want to get this done. Now I look forward to coming to work every day instead of the 90-degree. I know I'm going to be facing that 90-degree day again. I don't know if I want to be there or not, but I have to go because I need a paycheck. We need to fix that, and that's going to offer a different kind of growth. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, each candidate present will be able to present a 2-minute closing statement. Mr. Everett, we're going to start with you.
Okay. Well,
And hold on just a second so we get the time here. All right.
okay. I would first like to once again thank the DEA and OPSI Local 392 for hosting this forum tonight, and Mr. Miller for being the moderator. I'd also like to thank the audience for being here and those who aren't here and are on camera sitting at home. I offer to you, the voters, the opportunity to return someone to the Board of Education who has in essence been there and done that. someone who possesses the necessary experience and knowledge, and is familiar with being a board member. I was on the Dover Board of Education, as I said earlier, from 1986 to 1993. And during my tenure, we did have some monumental personnel issues. And we also had a $5.5 million bond issue passed, which led to the remodeling of elementaries, the old Dover High School, and the addition at the middle school. 27 years ago, I completed my second term on the board, and I decided that after 2 terms, that was enough, and it was time for someone else. I think changes are healthy for an organization such as this. I further believe different faces, new ideas, and a new thought process is a good thing. I seek a seat on the Board of Education now with no axe to grind. I don't have a hidden agenda, and I don't have anything personally to gain. What I do have is the burning desire to serve the community once again as a Board of Education member. In my current role as a Deputy Sheriff School Resource Officer with the Plain Local Schools, I see education and the educational process firsthand every single day. I know how it works, and it gives me an insight that many folks can't have. In closing, I would be very remiss if I didn't mention safety and the fact that our schools must be the safest that we can provide for our students and staff. They need to come to learn without any type of fear. Our staff needs to be up to date and have the best education possible so they can spring into action when necessary and be able to protect the students and themselves. This is where I have professional insight, and hopefully I can offer it to the board, the administration, and the staff. I've been in the keeping children safe business for 4 decades. Once again, I'm asking for your support on November 2nd. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Hanner.
Thank you all for sitting through this. It is, this is not must-see TV. I know you missed Alex tonight, and all of the people that are giving up something else to be here. So thank you. We're preaching to the choir in some ways, because if you're showing up tonight, you kind of know what's going on in the Dover district now. And maybe from the inside or the outside, you have a sense that things could be better. Maybe along the way tonight, you were listening and you heard that it does make sense to begin using technology in a better way to make sure that we're not surprising our community with news on the Board of Education. Mr. Everett talks about the 80s and the 90s in his effort, and during that time, we had a really strong media presence. We had a reporter that was dedicated to school issues. They would show up at the Board of Education. Dick Farrell would write about it if it didn't turn out that way, and sometimes would use the bully pulpit of the media. We don't have that benefit anymore. We have people making decisions about what happens on the front page of our paper several states away. We're lucky to get a couple of column inches a couple of days after a board meeting. People are feeling surprised. They are not feeling heard, and it creates this discontent. All to say, we've got a pair of CPAs, we've got an attorney on the Dover Board of Education, we've got Mrs. Lauber, and we've got Mr. Maston. One of the gifts I would bring is a real passion to make sure that people feel heard. We will not always agree on topics, but I will fight for you to make sure you feel heard. It's that simple. And that's why I ask for your vote, your support, because we've got some listening to do. That's going to build trust, and that's going to build a better future for all of Dover. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Maston.
I would agree with my fellow candidates up here. We appreciate you being here. I know you have better things to do on a night like tonight, but the fact you came out here says in Dover, education is important. As I talked about earlier, I ran large businesses in my background. It's prepared me for this job as a board member. Being a board member is actually one of the sweet spots in my career. There's so many things I don't know how to do. My wife back there can give you a list of about 20 things I just can't do. This is one of the things I do well. I'm a guy that, you run a big business like that, you're always looking around the next corner, you're trying to figure out how you're going to cut this off, head that off, fix this, solve that. That's what I've been doing since I've been here. I started the idea about building a new high school. It took 15 years. It took lots of slings and arrows, lots of resistance. People told me, well, you get out of my face with this issue, blah, 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 blah. 15 years. I'm the only board member that was there at the beginning and still there at the end. 15 years in our world is a life, is just an eternity. I started the swim team at Dover. I single-handedly started the swim team at Dover. We moved back here in '89, there was no swim team at Dover. The Y doesn't have a high school age swim team, so my girls got to the point where they were ready to swim in the high school, there was no place for them to go. How can that possibly be? So I got in touch with our athletic director, and we had some little arm twisting and whatever else. Went over to the YMCA, they had a coach for us, some Brenda chick, who turned out, yeah, right? Okay, what's a Brenda Worley? And we know what a Brenda Worley is now. But out of that came, we had 8 All-Ohio swimmers last year. My grandson was a state champion in 200 freestyle, and this other guy did pretty well overseas. I don't know if you remember his name, Hunter Armstrong. All that came out of the swim program. That's something that I started. And my point being, I'm always looking around that next corner. Bob Ham was here. I was on the committee that hired Bob Ham, and I was the one who personally selected him because he was not a superintendent, nobody else wanted him, but he was the right guy for the job. Gave us 14 of our best years we've had here. Bob did a wonderful job for us, and I'll tell you what, we were glad to have him here. So my point being, I bring a lot to the table. My experience enables me to do this kind of work and to do it quite well. So I would appreciate your vote. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for the 28 years. It's been a real privilege serving you, and I look back on it very fondly. Thank you all for being here.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks everyone for coming and writing in any questions that you had tonight. All right, have a good night and get home safe.